My, how things have changed. According to the nonpartisan Legislative Analyst Office, California's fiscal outlook is now, quote, remarkably good, unquote. But the rosy forecast comes with a warning. Things could change in a hurry. Our guest is the state's most respected authority on the state budget, Mac Taylor, California's legislative analyst.
Additional funding for the Maddy report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. From the California Channel at the state capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. So what is the current state of the state's finances? Remarkably good, according to our guest, Mac Taylor, California's nonpartisan legislative analyst and the recognized authority on the state budget. You're smiling. That's a change from years ago, I know that. So let's talk about state finances. Let's talk first of all about the economic outlook. What forms the basis for the economic outlook? What are you looking at?
Sure. We rely on a consensus national forecast of economists, and we use that for the national economy. Then we build our own forecast for the California economy. And I think that at least for the near term, out the next year or so, I think the consensus is that we will have continued growth, not maybe as robust as we've had, some slowing in job growth, for example, but generally I think pretty positive over the near term.
Yeah, the economic situation's been doing pretty well. The recovery's been going on it's a little long in the tooth.
It's a very long recovery historically. Yeah. That doesn't mean that it still can't proceed for a while longer.
You know, a lot of people probably are interested in what the specific outlook is for wages and salaries because it affects them on job growth. What are you seeing there?
Wages and salaries is obviously a key component of income. That's what most of us have, as you suggested. And there the outlook is very positive. Because unemployment is so low in the state, you obviously have employees in a good position to extract greater wage increases in order to either attract new employees or to keep the ones that you have.
Right. It's very different when there's high unemployment, obviously.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about housing, which is another big part of people's income or what they own, their assets. California has been experiencing a housing crisis for some time. What's the economic forecast for housing prices or house prices in California?
Well, as you said, obviously the high housing prices are a big concern in the state. And any time that you can have moderation of that, that's a good thing. And I think the main reason why we are forecasting a dampening of the growth in housing prices is because of high interest rates. That obviously makes it more difficult for people to drive up prices as they seek new homes. Obviously, it makes it more difficult to get in homes. So it's always sort of a balancing test there.
What about the supply of houses? Is that going up?
We're having some improvement in building more units than we have in recent years. It's still not high by historical standards, but it has gone up from where we were in the Great Recession, and that's obviously taking some pressure off prices too.
Yeah, they need more houses for sure. I mean,
we still need to build a lot more housing.
Right. Still behind on that. So let's talk about the stock market. Now,
okay.
That thing has been, if you're invested, you're getting nervous, goes up and down, and you better have a strong stomach. But the stock market's particularly important for California's fiscal situation. So let's talk about, first of all, what do you expect to see in the stock market, and then explain why it's so important for California's fiscal situation.
Yeah, again, we're sort of relying on that national consensus forecast that stock prices are not going to be doing much in the near future. Now, again, that maybe they won't be growing very much, but they still could be ping-ponging around. But we just think that given where price-earning ratios are, prospects for additional earnings, that they're not likely to go up from where they have been, say, an average over the past year. Now, the reason why it's so important to the state is because we do rely on high-income earners, and in good times, returns on capital gains from these high-income people can make up a very sizable part of our personal income tax.
Okay, well, how much? Can you give me like a number of how much how reliant we are on,
sure.
on these high-income earners?
The personal income tax is a key piece of our general fund picture, and capital gains can be as much as 15% of personal income tax revenues.
Wow, that's quite a bit. And the stock market's gone up. I mean, from 2014 to 17, there's been a nice run-up in the stock market.
Absolutely. And then you also have to kind of figure out, well, when are they going to take their gains? Are they short-term, long-term gains? There's still lots of difficulty in forecasting those. But generally, obviously, when you've had this kind of rise, it's been very good for California revenues.
Right. Yeah, they're doing very well. So there's also this issue about trade. President Trump has been talking about tariffs. What impacts does trade and tariffs have on the economy generally and on the state finances in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's general consensus that any sort of trade wars, trade restrictions is not good for the economy. And you can think about it from the perspective of producers in California who will have limited sales because of tariffs to other countries. And then you can think about it in terms of consumers who will have to pay higher prices from goods that they might import from China or other countries where we have these trade restrictions. So it's not a good thing for the state budget either. It's not a crucial aspect unless the trade wars really got out of hand, but it is a negative.
But if it hits the stock market, then it could have a
If
big
it affects
impact.
the state, and then you can have that effect through the capital gains.
Okay, up next, we're going to take a closer look at how much the state's revenues and expenses have been increasing. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking about the economic outlook and its implications for the state finances with Mac Taylor, California's nonpartisan legislative analyst. So let's talk about state revenues. First, where does the state collect its money? What are the basic sources of the revenue? How much has it increased over the last 5 years or so, and what's the outlook going forward?
Well, with regards to the state's main account, the general fund, we used to talk in terms of having the big three in taxes: personal income tax, corporate tax, and sales tax. Okay. We really now have the big one. Personal income taxes are about 70% of the general fund, and so what happens with them is sort of defines how you're doing, really. And fortunately, we've been doing very well over the last 5 years. For example, all revenues have increased by about 41%, which is obviously very good annual
strong
growth
wage
rate.
growth, strong stock market.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we've been doing very well, and we are forecasting for California, at least in the next fiscal year, that we'll continue to do well. Not so much because of the stock market, but really because of what we just talked about, wage and salary growth. Okay. We expect it to be fairly strong.
Yeah, I think you said wage growth about 4% adjusted for inflation, compared, and according to your report, 2.6% between 1993 and 2012. So a little faster wage growth than has been going on in the past. Let's turn to state expenses. K-12 is the biggest expense, about 40% of the general fund. I think you said that if you add higher education in there, it's over 50%.
It's about half on education.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of money. So what are the projections for state spending on education?
Well, we tend to think in terms of the Prop 98 budget, which covers K through 14, including the community colleges. Right. And that was the measure that passed that provides for this minimum amount of money we have to spend each year on K through 14.
Called the minimum guarantee. It's
called the minimum guarantee, and it reflects both general fund monies, the state general fund monies, and property taxes at the local level.
Okay.
That guarantee is we project will grow by about 3%, not only in the coming fiscal year, but really over our entire fiscal outlook period. Now, that may not seem like a lot for schools thinking 3% a year, except there's no growth in attendance. There's not an increase in students. In fact, it's been declining slightly. And so at least that means that the money that they do have can be spent on whatever, salaries, more teachers, whatever.
Yeah, I think you said in your report that you have $480 million over and above that 3.1% statutory COLA increase. There's $480 million basically to play with.
For decisions for the legislature.
Well, actually, play with is probably the wrong term, but they can use it however
for whatever purpose that they want.
And you could, I mean, I'm speculating here, but maybe pre-K is a possibility.
It could go to that. It could go to reducing class sizes for whatever that the legislature determines.
Another big expenditure for the state are Health and Human Services, and I think your office estimates that the cost will increase $1.6 billion, about 4%. And those increases are driven by 3 programs. What are the 3 programs that are driving this? The
biggest program by far in Health and Human Services is Medi-Cal, which provides health services to low-income people. And it's projected to grow just over 6% in 1920. That's in part because of a one-time factor of losing a revenue source that's going to be going away. But it's also just this program has typically grown fairly rapidly in recent years.
And the population is also aging. Maybe that has some impact.
That has some impact to do with it too. So that is the biggest program you look at in Health and Human Services. There are 2 other programs. Developmental services, particularly driven by increases in autism cases. And IHSS, in-home supportive services, which helps keep seniors and disabled people in their homes.
And so they've got growing caseload, they've got
growing cost,
minimum wage.
Exactly.
And so all this adds up. Okay, so another thing you note in your forecast, your estimates on HHS spending are less than half the administration's. So why the discrepancy?
Well, in some ways we don't know. Okay. That's one of the points that we're trying to raise, is that the administration typically has only forecast Health and Human Services as total, without the program detail. And so we're not exactly sure where our forecast for out-year spending differs by program, so it makes us hard to assess whether we think they are making a better case with their expenditure numbers or that our numbers are better. So we'd love to see a little more detail from the administration so we can make those assessments.
Okay, well, another area of spending is, of course, employee compensation, including retirement payments. How much do you project that they're going to increase?
We have them obviously going up. With PERS, rates have been still increasing as they've made adjustments in what their earnings assumptions are. And so we do have those increasing in a program that we've been looking at for several years because of the higher cost in those areas.
The correctional officers, too, are getting a 5% pay increase, and that's a big hit on the general fund.
Absolutely. That's a big piece of state employee salaries and benefits is corrections.
Now, the other thing you said in your report, you indicated that there are some other major spending increases that were offset by significant one-time spending. Can you explain that?
Sure. We've been talking about all these increases for 1920, the coming fiscal year. 1920.
Okay.
2019-20 is the fiscal year.
Sorry,
that will start next July 1.
I'm sorry. Well, 1920 is 100 years ago.
I'm sorry.
That was 2019
exactly.
2020. I apologize.
I used abbreviated. And so you think, well, all these increases, Medi-Cal 6%, schools 3%, you'd think spending would be growing a lot. However, we had a lot of one-time spending in 2018-19, the current fiscal year. Once you drop out the one-time spending, the year-to-year increase isn't as much. We're only forecasting that it's going to be 1.5%. So that's kind of underestimating what's really going on in a lot of programs, but that is the year-to-year increase that we're forecasting.
Okay, well, up next, a little bit more about state finances. How are we doing? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with California's nonpartisan legislative analyst, Mac Taylor, about the fiscal outlook for the state of California in the year ahead. Let's talk about the condition of the general fund. Your estimate is that the state will end the fiscal year with $9.1 billion in discretionary reserves. That's an increase of $7.2 billion over the amount that was assumed back when the budget was passed in June. First of all, can you describe what you mean by discretionary reserves? And second, why are the discretionary reserves, why do they end up being so much more than expected?
Sure. Well, the state has what we call the rainy day fund. That's constitutionally sort of provided for and protected. Monies go in sort of automatically. They can come out only in their limited situations. The discretionary reserves that you're talking about are really just sort of what's left over in your bank account at the end of the year. You spent less than you had.
Right.
And those reserves are another form that you can use for a rainy day, or you can use them for different purposes. And that's why the term discretionary, the legislature and governor can determine what they want to do with them. Okay. The reason why they increased so much from what we had planned was mainly revenues went up. They went up from what had been estimated by the administration. Right. We had always thought there was a lot more upside to the revenues. And I think you're going to find in January, well, we'll see where the administration is.
Which is, by the way, one of the strategy sometimes that the governor uses is to kind of come in a little low on the revenue so they can say, listen, don't spend all the money, we don't know we're going to have it.
It can be. It certainly can be, and it has been in some cases.
Yeah.
And so the reason it went up is, well, revenues we think are going to be a lot higher than what had been assumed in the budget. And also school spending, we talked about Proposition 98 spending, is down by over $1 billion, and that's for two factors. Property taxes are higher than we thought, and when that increases, the general fund part of the whole overall guarantee goes down. So that improves the bottom line for the general fund. Plus attendance was even lower than what we'd expected.
Yeah, the attendance is going down. So next fiscal year, the discretionary reserve is going to grow by, you're projecting $5.7 billion for a total of almost $15 billion, $14.8 billion in available discretionary reserves. How did you arrive at those figures?
Again, it was really taking what we've already talked about, the spending increases that we think will happen. And remember, because of the one-time spending in the current year, leaving you with a very small year-to-year increase, we basically just had much greater revenue growth than that spending. That money all goes to the bottom line of your discretionary reserves. Now, we know that the legislature and the governor may want to spend some of those monies. So when we say this is what you would have, it's assuming that no additional programs are funded. It's not that we're projecting that, it's just giving you a baseline from which to start.
But that's a big caveat.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the decisions that the legislature and governor will make.
Right, do you increase spending, do you reduce taxes, do you increase reserves?
Exactly.
What do you do with this money? So what do you project regarding constitutionally required reserves, infrastructure spending, and debt payments?
Right, well under Proposition 2, which the voters approved a few years ago, We have to put some of the increase in monies into our rainy day reserve. We're going to sort of top that off at the 10%
There's a cap,
max.
like 10%.
10% of general fund revenues. We'll top that off.
Which, by the way, that seems to be, we talk to businesses, having a 10% reserve is pretty prudent. It seems reasonable.
Right, although you think about it, it depends on what type of business you're in.
It's true. If it's volatile.
If it's a volatile business like real estate, you probably want to have more.
Yeah, that's true.
If it's a business that's pretty stable, maybe it's providing a certain type of good that people need almost all the time, you wouldn't have to have as big a reserve.
It's nice to have one.
It is nice to have one, though. And then so the amount of money over the 10% reserve is going to be spent on infrastructure. We think that's going to be about $900 million. And again, the legislature and the governor will determine what projects to spend on. And then we pay off debts under Prop 2. We have about $1.7 billion that we're going to pay off past debts, such things as loans that we had made, and we're just going to pay them off.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to get those things off. One thing I did notice in your report, I thought this was really interesting, was this $268 million to use to pre-fund retiree health benefits. It's interesting. It sounds like a lot of money, but that problem is pretty large, the outstanding liability there. And the difference between your retiree health and pensions is with public employee pensions, we put money aside, and then the interest on that money we use to kind of pay for the cost. We don't do that with retiree health. Retiree health is we pay every year. Is this a way to kind of get at that problem? Absolutely.
We're shifting from pay-as-you-go, as they refer to it, where you just wait until the people retire and pay for their health care cost, to pre-funding it when in effect, those future benefits are being earned. And so we have tens of billions of dollars in liabilities, but we're now starting to pay for them, and hopefully over a 25, 30-year period, we'll get to the point where we've paid off the liabilities and we're putting in the amount of money we need to each year that can earn money, as you said, to pay for those future benefits.
It's basically letting the money work for you, right?
Absolutely.
And that's going to reduce the cost to the general fund. Let me ask you this. Your conclusion on the state budget is that, and I'm really struck by this, I got to tell you, Mac, because in the years we've been on talking about the budget, I was shocked to see you're not a person prone to these kinds of words. Remarkably good shape. That's a big change from when Jerry Brown took office back in 2010. How does it compare historically?
Well, or even when I started as the legislative analyst in 2008, when we were just sort of tanking as a state, and the economy and the nation.
20 billion.
40 billion. I mean, you know,
as far as the eye could see.
They were unimaginable deficits when back then, even a decade ago. And if you had told me we'd get to the point where we're projecting total reserves, of 20 billion or in excess of 20 billion, I would have thought you were crazy. And so we've made remarkable good progress, and right now, at least, we're in very good shape.
Yeah, and that's the caveat. So the picture is very rosy right now, but things can change quickly. So some possible different scenarios that could change things. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with a person universally recognized as the expert on the state budget, California's nonpartisan legislative analyst, Mac Taylor, about the state's current fiscal outlook. You said that, quote, the state budget is in remarkably good shape, unquote. But you've added a word of caution that things could change quickly, and you specifically refer to what happened during the dot-com bust of 2001. What happened there?
In November of 2000, when we put out our Outlook report, we talked in terms of a possible $10 billion surplus at the end of the following year. Things were booming.
Sounds
the markets
good.
were. The next November, when we did our Outlook, we were talking in terms of a $12.5 billion deficit at the end of the next year. That's how fast.
$22 billion swing.
Turnaround, just because of our reliance on high-income taxpayers and capital gains.
Capital gains, right. So in light of those uncertainties, you've kind of come up with different scenarios. You have a growth scenario and a recession scenario. So let's talk about the growth scenario first. How do you define that?
Well, you just have to sort of posit a couple of different things, the way things could go. Okay. We don't assign probabilities to them. We can't forecast what's going to happen 2-3 years ahead of time. So we say under a growth scenario, we just assume sort of continued moderate growth. Not real high levels. We realize we're at the end of a long recovery. Slowing job growth, dampen down things, but continued growth over the next 3 years.
Okay, and so in that situation, in the growth scenario, how does the state end up faring?
The state does very well. We do very well.
Continues to do well.
We continue to do well. We have operating surpluses. That is, just in any one year, your revenues are greater than your expenses. So basically, you can even build up reserves or you can spend more money.
The question is if it keeps going, though, because the reality is this recovery has been going on for quite a long time. So let's turn our attention to the recession scenario. Not predicting it.
That's right.
If it happens, first of all, how do you define recession?
You know, we picked a scenario of a relatively quick recession, but where you have a fairly steep drop in the stock market. It loses about a third of its value. So just to try to mimic what might happen. And in that case, your reserves that you've built up buy you a lot of time. They don't quite get you through, it can almost allow you to get through the recession without making any sort of cuts. Now the problem is, if you then think about making additional commitments in this coming fiscal year, and we did a scenario of what if you add $3 billion in ongoing spending and $2 billion in one-time spending. Now your situation is much worse in trying to deal with a recession scenario.
I mean, I would assume you would like to see either putting that money more in reserves or one-time spending. What you don't really want is to add new programs that is going to be ongoing spending that's really going to take a hit.
I think in a nutshell that's it. That you can have some ongoing spending. I mean, that's what the legislature and the governor have to talk over. Right. But at least build up your reserves, continue to build up your reserves, and do focus on one-time spending, because then the next year that goes away. It makes your situation, your ability to adapt to a negative economic and revenue situation much easier.
Yeah, one thing I also noticed in your report, you were talking about demographic trends, and specifically you were talking about California's aging population. What is the impact on the state's fiscal outlook going forward with an aging population?
Obviously the growth in people 65 and over is very, very significant. And that does have some effects on the state budget.
By the way, I want to say that 65, this young group.
No comment. It has some effects on the state budget through our Medi-Cal program. We find nursing homes, our IHSS program we talked about that provides seniors. But surprisingly enough, demographically, they're working for the state budget, because much of what we spend on, we talked about education, is driven by the 5 through 24-year-old groups. Those are projected to actually decrease over the coming years.
So then the general fund spending is going to be lower?
Well, lower than it would have otherwise have been. In other words, there's not the same pressures if you had significant growth, say in your 5 to 18 population, because the education budget is such a large part. If it's growing faster than overall population, it could eat up big chunks of your budget and put pressure on the rest of it.
And what about the fact that you're losing these people from the workforce?
That's another thing. You look at that sort of prime wage earning group, which is maybe 40 through 60, where people are earning at
or 65,
or even at 65. And that group is not growing very rapidly. Okay. So you do have to look at all of those age groups and sort of think, well, what's the total effect on the state budget?
Okay, so we're going to end up here. We've only got about 20 seconds left, but according to the fiscal outlook, what are you recommending?
I think it goes back to what we were just talking about. Be careful about making additional commitments. Build up those reserves. They're really important. And focus on one-time spend.
Well, I want to thank our guest, Mac Taylor, California's legislative analyst, for joining us. If you want to stay current in state and local politics, you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or you can log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.